So, back in my middle school years, I had a friend, his name is Justin, and Justin and I were pretty close friends. He was Korean, and we played in the same string quartet. I would play the piano, and he would play the cello, and we would busk after school, making a couple of dollars and could go eat at a restaurant with two other violinists. Now, in the 8th grade, Justin told me that I would unfortunately probably never see him again because he was moving to Korea as an international student. His father owned a couple companies and they weren't doing so well back at home after COVID, and so they would have to move back, and after that, I wouldn't get to see him. Obviously, I was a little disappointed, but I said we'd keep in touch, and that's how it's been for the past couple years. Fast forward to right now, and in January, my parents decided that we're going back to China. It's the first time I'm going to see my grandparents since COVID, and they told me that on the way back, we're going to take a pit stop in South Korea for a couple days. And so, given the opportunity, I reached out to my old friend Justin, and I said we could catch up on a little bit. Not wanting to seem like some uneducated American going to a country for the first time, I did a quick Google search about South Korea, and I want you guys to predict what you think I found when I Google searched just the word South Korea on that one January day. Maybe it was like, I don't know, K-pop. I mean, that's a pretty big South Korean trend. Or maybe it was like Squid Game. I mean, we've all seen that show. It's pretty good. It was actually none of those things. It was this image. This is a protest outside the former president Yoon's. He was the former president of South Korea, outside his home. Thousands of people went outside and they wanted to physically get out and demand for some things that they weren't happy about the country. And it's because if you missed it, last December, the president, now impeached, enacted martial law on December 3rd on South Korea, when South Korea was not in a war. That means that the military controls the government, and in less than 6 hours, legislative makers had to scramble around the clock as soldiers tried to enter the National Assembly proceeding hall and take control of the country. And even though it was reversed, and he is now impeached, protests went out and South Korea broke into flames in just those 6 hours. Millions of South Koreans flocked to the streets protesting the end of democracy. And even though this happened over half a year ago, the protests are still continuing. Like last week, millions of people showed up on the streets, still protesting that South Korea is broken. And the reason is because even though this is a country that is hailed as a model of westernization and how technology can transform a war-torn developing country and one of the fastest economies in the world, South Korea has a lot of issues. The biggest one centered around this number. That's the fertility rate of South Korea, and if you didn't fail macroeconomics like I did, you'll remember that the golden ratio for a population to sustain itself is about 2.1 children per woman, which makes sense, about 2 children per couple. 0.75 is nowhere near that number, and that is an issue for the economy because it means that South Korea will eventually fail. And this is kind of hard to conceptualize, so visual aids are always a good thing, right? This is a population pyramid of South Korea. The same exists for every single country. It shows you the distribution of ages and how it's divided by gender and how much of the population is in a certain bracket. Modern industrial capitalist societies are founded on the idea that if we have a larger working or productive age population than smaller cohorts of unproductive working age populations, the economy can sustain itself. Those smaller unproductive parts being seniors who are already retired and don't contribute anything to the economy, or children who obviously haven't been able to work yet. But as long, even though that they drain resources out of the economy, as long as we have a larger working population, they'll go better, which is what South Korea looks like kind of right now. For every one retired senior in South Korea, we have about 4 South Koreans to make sure that the economy moves forward. And it's a good thing. But if you look at the bottom of the chart, you'll notice that this trend isn't going to continue because there aren't going to be enough South Koreans to sustain the new working age population when they become seniors. If we fast forward through the century, you'll see by 2036 it moves up, 2050, 2062, and then by 2070, we'll have less working age South Koreans than the retired age population, which has never happened before in any economy. And by the end of the century, there will be only half of South Koreans that exist, a country that is going to disappear, and there's practically nothing that we can do about it. The issue with this is obvious. With a smaller working age population, and if each working age South Korean has to support themselves and another retired age South Korean, it means that they're not going to focus on having children because they have to focus on surviving on themselves. And this is the type of demographic doom loop that only makes a country collapsing on itself even worse. With inflation skyrocketing and debt rising, South Koreans will be less motivated to have their own children, also dropping the fertility rate that has caused the problem in the first place. Why is it happening? Some people think that it's a political issue. If we go back to the impeached president, he has now been replaced. One thing you should know about him is that he won the election by a very, very narrow majority against liberal votes. He ran on an anti-feminist platform and vowed to destroy the Ministry of Gender Equality in South Korea because he believes that feminism is the reason why fertility rate in all the countries in all the problems in South Korea exist. This, unfortunately, is how he got voted on. A lot of the men in South Korea voted for him, very slim majority, but it's what got him voted. A poll by The Economist found that 80% of young men in South Korea believe that they're being discriminated against by the female population. I want you to take a second and imagine you're a woman in South Korea. It's a country with extremely high beauty expectations already. By the time that a South Korean woman is 30, 1 in 4 South Koreans will already have undergone plastic surgery. And then on top of that, you're faced with extreme discrimination from your male counterparts who believe that you're doing too much. And also, on top of that, you have the highest wage gap out of any single country in the entire world. That's not the conducive environment that a lot of South Korean women are looking for. On the other side, men believe that any time a South Korean woman tries to protest this, that it's discriminating against them because there's a lack of opportunity. And so you'll see less and less of South Koreans trying to get together and more of them leaving abroad to find other people outside of the country to have children with. Another thing that doesn't help is just the extreme working culture in South Korea. I'm going to draw on a stereotype about Asians. I mean, we go to Doherty Valley, right? Most of us know that we're supposed to be the hardest working, right? And it comes from rooted in somewhere, for example, South Korea. The expectation in South Korea is that you're supposed to feel a lot of workload. Your boss is supposed to have you work long hours, and after that, you're supposed to work even longer hours. And this is particularly worse for women because they're expected to maintain the same caliber in South Korea as men do. If you have a child, it's holding back your career. And eventually, what you're left with is a choice between raising a child and becoming a mother, or focusing on your career to be better. Most of the women are just simply choosing not to have children, and that's why the fertility rate is declining. Even if they did have children, though, the prospects aren't a lot better. The average cost to raise a child per capita in South Korea is about $270,000. That's 4 times more than it takes in Australia. And the reason why this number is so high is because of the way South Korea's economy is structured. Back in the 1960s, the then dictatorial government decided to jumpstart the economy after the Korean War by investing in a few mega corporations that were supposed to guide the country to greatness. These mega corporations were given to familial dynasties, huge, powerful families that today are known as chaebols. And I mean, you guys know the names of these companies. They're pretty big ones. I'm talking about Samsung, LG, Kia, Hyundai. These companies control most of South Korea, and essentially what they've done is that South Korea has given them preferential tax breaks and also extreme subsidies to help make sure that they can compete at the same level as American and international markets, which is why they've done so well. South Korea set up a pipeline where from birth, children can go to school and enter one of these chaebol companies to produce high-quality semiconductors and military cutting-edge technology that makes South Korea so successful today. It's capitalism at its finest, basically. It's also the same system that is unfortunately choking the life out of South Korea, because if you look at the distribution of how jobs are introduced, you'll find that even though chaebol companies, the top 5, employ over 50% of the market in South Korea, they employ only 12% of the population. That's a small number. And it means that because there are so many limited spots, it's fierce competition to get into one of these companies. The way to get into one of these companies is something called the Sky Universities. Again, I'm gonna have to go back on this stereotype, but how many of you guys have parents that want you to get into a good college? And if you're a parent, how many of you guys want your child to get into college, right? Like, my mom told me when I was like, the first day of middle school, like, you better get into Harvard or you're gonna be homeless. Unfortunately, in Korea, that statement might be more true. The Sky Universities, Seoul University, Korea University, and Yonsei University are essentially the South Korean Ivy League. And it's because these are the only way to get a ticket into one of the chaebol companies. Getting into a university will decide your life or make sure that you don't have one. And because these things are so competitive, South Korea has a system of academic competitiveness that no other country faces. It's a term called hagwons. The public system in South Korea is extremely competitive. And outside of that public system, South Koreans feel that they need to have private extracurricular tutoring. 98% of South Korean families have private tutors for their own children because they feel that the public education system is not preparing them enough to enter these Sky universities. And unfortunately, because of the high living costs, these families are spending more on private tutoring than on housing, food, and basic living necessities. The average day in a South Korean child's life is to go to public school for 8 hours, go to private school for a couple hours, and then sleep very minimally just to get into this system. And the problem is that even though this is a great system, there are only so many spots in these chaebol companies. And while a couple South Korean children might end up successful and getting one into these big Sky universities and then going to one of the chaebols, the rest of the 88% of South Koreans are left with a lifetime spent studying so competitively and feeling like they never got anything in return. If you look at a map from South Korea at night, this is what you're going to see. This is just like a satellite image. It's urbanization, you can tell, because all the lights are concentrated around Seoul. Action was essentially how we express ourselves culturally to other people, and she believed that after the Industrial Revolution, where companies started to exist, we started losing that facet of action, where people started to define themselves less as people and more how to get a good job, how to get into the best school, how to make the most money, and started to distance themselves from each other. It's this sort of human connection which South Korea is lacking right now. People don't want to date their female and male counterparts because gender inequality is so bad. People don't want to spend time with their families because they'd rather be studying. People don't feel like they can't have children because it'd be more important for them to get a good job. And so, even though South Korea is a complex issue, the next time you can apply it to yourself. So if you're facing some sort of competitive anxiety, take this spring break off and maybe do yourself a little favor and take a break. Thank you.